Vi ska nu få en utförlig genomgång av vad forskningen säger om effekterna av mångfald i beslutssituationer. Och den som ska ge oss detta är Vivian Hunt som är vd för McKinsey i Storbritannien. Vivian Hunt, welcome on stage. The floor is yours. A warm applause.
It's a pleasure to be with you. My family moved to Europe over 20 years ago, and although I'm based in our London office, my very first projects were actually in Sweden. I was just a junior associate, a starting out person, and if you had told me then that I'd be speaking to you now in recognition of, but continuation of, Pontus Schult's legacy, I would have been humbled. I hope that the perspective I'll bring with respect to some of the research we've done recently on diversity and diverse leadership teams is thought-provoking for you. I have to tell you, I didn't expect to be standing here for another reason as well. It is very rare to find a 6-foot-tall, African-American, American-sounding, British, female head of anything, much less McKinsey. And so when I was asked to take on the leadership role a couple of years ago, I decided to answer in advance the question I knew I'd get. I spent the first 20 years of my career not doing a single public speech on gender, diversity, or other aspects of difference. I did my speaking around the affirmative power of diversity on performance through my work, largely in the healthcare sector, largely in the leadership transformation. But I knew once you assume a leadership role, higher visibility, questions would come. And McKinsey being McKinsey, I knew we needed a robust answer. And so we did a little work to build and ask ourselves the question, does diversity actually matter? The work that we're doing builds on a long tradition of research and scholarship on diversity. Some of those diverse profiles are very familiar to us. Gender, 50% certainly of this room and our population, but also many other dimensions related to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability, disability, and importantly, culture, national culture and ethnicity, if you will, and expanding on that tradition. So in some cases, the arguments had been made. The data was voluminous, it seemed persuasive. But the acid test for most business people is how does it impact performance? The arguments based on rights, theology, social justice, your own inner sense of moral compass, who you like to spend time with, are all persuasive. But at the end of the day, many of us are compelled and indeed obligated to push on performance and doing what we can do in our sectors and our industries to ensure our company or organization continues to lead. So we knew we had a strong base of material to build on, but we didn't yet have a more conclusive case over whether diversity mattered, and if so, how. We looked across over 300 companies in 7 markets, and what we learned was quite astoundingly, diversity does matter. If you look just right on the very bottom of the chart, across the segment of companies, we compared top quartile performers, those who were leading in terms of financial performance in their sectors, with those who weren't. And we asked ourselves, were their teams more diverse? Were they actually doing something different in the composition of their leadership teams? I'm sure they were doing many things well, but they also have more diverse leadership teams. If you compare, for example, for gender, the top quartile companies to the bottom quartile companies, you see a 7-point difference. If you extend that to race and ethnicity, again, the bottom right, you see a 15-point difference between leading companies who are also more diverse. I don't know how much performance improvement you get motivated for. Most athletes, if they could run a little bit faster, maybe 1%, 2%, that would be enough to win the race. Most companies, if they can just improve their earnings per share or their revenue targets or their satisfaction targets a little bit year on year, they'll feel satisfied. But when you look at a 30% difference in terms of race and ethnic diversity, cultural background, if you will, and even still within gender, 15% more, you have to ask yourself, what are these teams doing that's giving them real differentiation and better outcomes? We know the analysis is correlated, not causal, but it is statistically significant in every market, every sector, every industry, subsegment that we could find. We were going to do 15 markets. We're going to fill in a few more European countries, add a little bit of Asia. McKinsey, we love global benchmarks and standards in terms of what excellent performance and excellent outcomes look like. But we stopped the research early because this outcome is a wow. It's much more significant than even we expected. It didn't just confirm your gut feeling on some diverse, unique team you worked on at university or a high-performing team for a particular deal. What it showed was across industries, across geographies, is that leading companies have a positive correlation with more diverse leadership teams, not only with gender, but also with race and ethnic diversity. I'm very sure when you look at individual company data, as some companies have done, you also see other factors related to national culture that are positively correlated. Our leadership bar for this data is high. We only included the board of directors, the CEO, and the CEO -1. Genuine, undisputed, comparable decision-making authority across markets. And it's not good news. The facts are that diversity matters in a really profound way for companies with strong performance. Interestingly, the inverse is also true. Companies that lack diverse profiles in their senior leadership teams perform less well. Sometimes the positive is true. If you work out a little bit more, you'll be more fit. But the opposite is not true. If you don't work out, you're necessarily less fit. Yes, over time, but not in a day, not at a systemic level. And sometimes in statistical analyses, as those of you who are more experienced than I am at this will know, statistics can give you funny results. But what's interesting in this analysis, and actually incremental to our previous work on gender, is it shows that it not only is correlated with a positive outcome in performance, but it also says that companies, the light blue again, who are in the bottom quartile for gender and ethnicity, perform significantly worse than companies who do. And so not only do leading companies who perform at a higher level have leadership teams and decision-making bodies that are more diverse, those who lack that diversity perform less well, both sides of the coin. We called it something of a penalty, if you will, that if you look at low performing in gender, low performing on ethnicity, you see a sort of a double down tick, if you will, or a double dampening effect. For us, that's also very exciting because it says not only the presence of diversity in leadership, gender, ethnicity, and other factors helps correlate with positive outperformance, but also the absence of diversity is positively correlated with low performance. Again, the facts were very persuasive. We then, of course, cut the data lots of different ways, and I won't spend much time on this chart, but simply to say that in different geographies, the pattern expressed itself differently. And probably most importantly, what you see is in some geographies that have very low numbers. In many cases, diverse, ethnic, cultural talent is hard to find. You find that the numbers are still significant. In other areas where you have a lot of a particular group, women as an example, you find that the threshold goes up. So for example, in the US, to get the benefit for leading companies, you need over 22% women in your decision-making body. What that helps us believe is that you have to move beyond tokenism. One woman in your board of directors, one person from a more diverse background, one non-European, or if I'm Dangote or Tata, one non-Nigerian, one non-Indian decision maker on my team, might be representative, might give you a little voice, but it may not correlate strongly with better decision making. You have to have genuine diversity of debate, the minimum won't do. And then finally, we looked at it by sector. Said not only does it matter across the big data set, let's look at it for certain industries. And here we just took the consumer sector, and what you see is in that upper right-hand corner, which every chart McKinsey produces seems to have, you'll see very few bubbles in the box. Very few companies are high both on ethnic diversity and gender diversity. And what that suggests to us, number one, is that the differences within sector suggests that leading companies are also more diverse, not just in aggregate, but also within your sector. And so it may help you with competitive advantage. Because at the end of the day, if you run a newspaper or a telecoms company or a consumer company, your competitive set may be defined. But within a competitive set, the correlation was still true. And secondly, we see variances in performance. Importantly, having significant progress and being very diverse on gender does not secure or necessarily mean that you also have diverse decision-making bodies with respect to race and ethnicity. This is important because very often with diverse leadership teams, companies, given the overwhelming mandate around gender as well as the numbers, believe if I can just get started on women, get moving on gender, that's tough enough to do. You know, my office today is 35% women. I'd love to see it at a much higher level. How do we do that? If I just get that done, I can create a good environment and all boats will float. I don't know if you have that phrase in Sweden, that when the tide goes up, it'll take the pressure off everything and it'll be a better environment. And that may be true in some companies in some cases, but in aggregate, it's not true. And that suggests for us that the levers that you pull around one affinity group, gender, for example, aren't good enough. They're not going to ensure that you also have particularly diverse ethnic as well as cultural teams. The talent pool is smaller, the needs are different, and the prize certainly seems worth it. So if correlation, not causation, if it does really appear that from every way we can look at the data, diversity matters in terms of how leading companies perform, what might be the drivers of that? The first one is one you know, talent. Talent is its own reward. Excellent people can transform your organization in key decision-making roles. That can be a leader of a team, a leader of a department, a leader of an area, product innovation. It doesn't have to be directly reporting to the CEO. Our point is not about hierarchy. It's more about responsibility in decision-making roles in your organization. And if you do nothing else as a company but fight for talent and get the best reporters, the best product analysts, the best engineers that you possibly can, that will help you perform at a higher level. Our sense is that the second driver is decision-making. Diverse inputs to decision-making are correlated with better outcomes. It's more collaborative, leads to better debate, and normally better decision-making. Many business schools, economics departments have proven this time and time again, that diversity of inputs leads to higher and more robust quality thinking. I've got lots of charts with statistical analyses for those who have appetite for that, but I can assure you that the quality of decision-making is probably, if you want my personal view, the biggest driver on this page. And it's important because if we were making a decision, this group of people should make a case to buy the company. That group should make a case to sell. You are going to buy part of the company and take an option on the rest. And you, my good, thoughtful, challenging friends, are going to come with a contrarian argument. Don't buy the company. It's the wrong thing to do. It destroys value. And by debating those 4 points of view robustly, even if we still make the same decision, we have a better quality decision than if it was just 4 Vivian Hunts sitting around the table. So when you take away the words race and ethnicity, you take away the words gender, you take away some of the sensitive language in the code, and you just talk about a business decision, you think, well, that makes sense. I would never buy a company without more inputs and a debate around it. It's the same with the quality of all of your decisions. More diversity of experience makes you more prepared for particularly global ambition that Swedish business and organizations have. Global in terms of your leadership, global in terms of your results. And in order to take full advantage of that global opportunity, quality of decision making is required. The third one is where many companies start, customer insight. There's a company in the US that is in food services and catering, airlines, or mechanics and repair. The fastest growing segment in the US market today is the Hispanic segment at 17% of the population, 17. And so a very fast growing group are small businesses under 100 or 200 employees that are owned by Hispanic women. Now, if you don't have any Hispanic women in your marketing department, product development, services, or management team, it's going to be hard to get your message right the first time. And there are some companies, Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, Asda, many that are famous for customer insight as their lens into this issue. Motivating employees and increasing satisfaction, again, where many companies start, absolutely the right thing to do. And indeed, high-performing colleagues, your top 20% of employees in an organization, score working in a modern, tolerant, progressive organization very highly. So even if you don't value progressive policies around diversity, cultural and ethnic diversity, disability and ability, cultural background, your highest performing employees, particularly millennials, value that. They value it very highly. And they're proud of a company that has those policies, even if they don't apply to them. So there's lots of different ways that you can end up doing the right thing, but keeping all of your employees, including your most talented employees, motivated should be a big one within that. Last and finally, this is a very busy week around the issue of company credibility, trust, and global relevance. I mean, it's getting to the point where it's not funny anymore. I work in an industry that used to be in 1970 the most trusted industry in the world, pharmaceuticals, medical products, and the healthcare space. Long-term capital bets, multi-million, sometimes billion-pound investments to develop products over a 10 or 12-year life cycle to save human life. That's a great value proposition. Today, they spend millions of pounds to develop products over 10 or 12 years to save human life, and they're the least trusted industry above tobacco. And so now companies, individual companies, have to compete and earn their place as a trusted company. A rising tide doesn't float all boats when it comes to trust. You have to prove it to the regulator, as we're learning, prove it to your customers, prove it to your employees, and it can be a source of real differentiation. Why, if we believe this, have we not made more progress? In closing, I just want to make one comment about bias. These are not comfortable topics always to discuss. Sometimes the environment we're working in is one that's not accepting, open, familiar with how to work with people of diverse cultural backgrounds, how to challenge themselves around the absence of racial, cultural ethnicity. I know just within Scandinavia, you have all kinds of code and jokes and cultural norms between different countries, regions of Sweden. Imagine how that is across cultures. And environments, with the best will in the world, are sometimes very biased, not with the intent of discouraging employees, but not knowing how systemic bias can affect their chances for performance. If you've never had an ethnic minority in any leadership position in your company, it's very hard to see and experience what they might know. The other side, of course, is internal bias. Do the employees themselves see themselves as confident, qualified, accepted? And is that voice, that inner voice I tell my children to go to when they get stressed? Listen to your inner voice and talk about your talents. Does that inner voice give you a positive message, or does that inner voice give you a negative message, a message of doubt? And you need to work on both of these things. Many companies start on the right, bolstering the employee, helping him or her to feel more accepted. Don't worry, we'll make sure you're successful, etc. When the reality is 90% of the issue, our view, are things that the company can work on systemically to, again, reduce unconscious, unintended bias and make you better able to take advantage of talent wherever it comes from. Many people see different things. We see the same environment. Some people look at this picture and they'll see a dog. Some will see a boat. Some will see a tree. I know some of you see a corner, and some just see black and white dots. That's me. We all see the same thing differently, and our biases help us untangle that. There are lots of examples we'll talk through today with companies and examples of how companies are making huge progress on this topic. We're living in the right time to attack this, and hopefully the frame that we've set today has given you a little bit of a start in terms of how some of these issues, both organizational as well as individual, can help you make progress and see that diversity does matter. Thank you.